There comes a moment in every toxic dynamic when the narcissistic woman begins to sense something deeply unsettling. You are no longer emotionally controlled by her. At first, she will not believe it. She has spent so much time studying your reactions, understanding your weaknesses, learning which emotions make you bend, apologize, chase, or surrender. For a narcissistic personality, control is not simply a desire. It is psychological survival. The moment you stop reacting the way she expects, her entire inner structure begins to shake. Carl Jung often spoke about the shadow, the hidden, unconscious part of the personality that people refuse to confront within themselves. A narcissistic woman survives by hiding from her own shadow. She avoids her emptiness through power, validation, and emotional domination over others. But when you begin to develop self-awareness, emotional discipline, and inner stability, you unknowingly force her to face what she has spent her life escaping. This is why your silence becomes powerful. Not angry silence, not silence meant to punish, but the silence of a man who no longer needs to defend himself to someone committed to misunderstanding him. The moment you stop explaining yourself endlessly, stop begging to be seen correctly, and stop trying to earn basic respect, she feels the shift immediately. And this is where the real psychological battle begins. Because narcissistic control only works when your identity depends on their approval. The moment your peace matters more than winning arguments, you become dangerous to the manipulator. She notices that guilt no longer weakens you. Fear no longer controls you. Emotional chaos no longer pulls you into confusion. And for the first time, she realizes she cannot predict your behavior anymore. That uncertainty terrifies her. Many people think strength is loud. It is not. True strength is emotional independence. It is the ability to remain grounded while someone else tries to provoke you into losing yourself. And once a narcissistic woman realizes she can no longer control your inner state, she understands something she hoped would never happen. Her power over you is ending. The person who cannot be emotionally controlled becomes impossible to destroy. Once a narcissistic woman realizes that control is slipping away, she rarely accepts it with dignity. Instead, she moves toward one final strategy: emotional chaos. This is the stage where many people become confused, because the behavior suddenly becomes unpredictable. One day she appears cold and hateful, the next day emotional and vulnerable. She may cry, apologize, flatter you, accuse you, seduce you, or attack your character. Sometimes all within the same conversation. To an untrained mind, this looks like emotional instability. But psychologically, it is something far more calculated. Chaos is her final weapon because confusion weakens clarity. Carl Jung understood that people who are disconnected from their true selves often manipulate external reality to avoid confronting their inner disorder. A narcissistic woman cannot tolerate the feeling of losing psychological influence over someone she once controlled. And when direct manipulation stops working, she creates emotional storms designed to pull you back into reaction. The goal is simple. If she can make you emotional again, she can regain access to your mind. This is why so many people return to toxic relationships after finally breaking free. Not because the relationship became healthy, but because constant emotional pressure exhausted their ability to think clearly. The human mind seeks relief from tension, and narcissistic manipulation feeds on that weakness. She may suddenly become affectionate, reminding you of who she was in the beginning. She may speak softly, act wounded, or tell you that nobody understands her except you. But this is often not love. It is psychological bait. And when affection fails, intimidation usually follows. Anger, blame, guilt, and emotional accusations become tools to destabilize your inner balance. The important thing to understand is that emotional chaos only has power when you abandon self-awareness. The moment you recognize the pattern, the illusion begins to break. You stop asking, "Why is she acting this way?" and start understanding, "She is acting this way because she feels powerless." And that realization changes everything. Because the strongest person in the room is not the one creating emotional storms. It is the one who refuses to drown in them. One of the most dangerous tactics a narcissistic woman will use when she feels herself losing control is not direct aggression, but psychological distortion. She will attempt to make you doubt your own mind. This is where manipulation becomes deeply subtle, because the attack is no longer aimed at your emotions alone. It is aimed at your perception of reality itself. Carl Jung believed that the greatest threat to an individual is unconsciousness. The moment a person loses connection with their own inner truth, they become vulnerable to external control. A narcissistic personality understands this instinctively. If she can make you question your memory, your instincts, your judgment, or even your sanity, she weakens your ability to stand independently. This is why gaslighting becomes so powerful. She may deny things she clearly said. She may rewrite past events to paint herself as innocent and you as unstable. She may accuse you of being too sensitive, paranoid, or selfish simply because you noticed patterns that expose her behavior. Over time, these contradictions create psychological exhaustion. You begin replaying conversations in your head, wondering if maybe you misunderstood everything. And once a person begins doubting their own perception, they start depending on the manipulator to define reality for them. That is the real trap. The narcissistic woman does not always want your love. Often, she wants authority over your identity. She wants to become the voice inside your head that determines whether you feel guilty, worthy, confident, or broken. This is why intelligent, emotionally aware people can still become trapped in toxic relationships. Manipulation is not about intelligence. It is about prolonged psychological pressure. But the moment you reconnect with your inner clarity, the manipulation begins to lose its grip. Jung often emphasized the importance of individuation, the process of becoming deeply connected to your authentic self. When you trust your observations, your intuition, and your emotional experience without needing constant external validation, you become psychologically difficult to control. And this is what the narcissistic woman fears most, a person who sees clearly. Because once you stop questioning your own reality, her illusions no longer have a place to survive. The stronger you become emotionally, the more desperate the narcissistic woman often becomes psychologically. This confuses many people because they assume maturity and calmness should naturally create peace in a relationship. But with a narcissistic personality, Your growth threatens the very foundation of the dynamic. What once worked on you no longer works, and that loss of influence creates panic beneath the surface. At the beginning, she may have been drawn to your empathy, patience, and willingness to understand her. But once those qualities evolve into self, respect, and emotional boundaries, the relationship changes completely. You stop tolerating disrespect in the name of love. You stop explaining yourself endlessly just to avoid conflict. You stop sacrificing your inner peace to maintain temporary harmony. And this transformation forces her to confront a reality she cannot easily manipulate anymore. Carl Jung often warned that people resist confronting the parts of themselves they fear most. A narcissistic woman survives by maintaining an illusion of superiority and control. But your emotional strength acts like a mirror. It reflects back the insecurity, dependency, and fear hidden beneath her carefully constructed image. And instead of facing those truths honestly, she may react with greater hostility, manipulation, or emotional cruelty. This is why the attacks sometimes intensify after you become stronger, not before. She may become colder, more critical, more unpredictable. She may accuse you of changing, becoming selfish, or no longer caring about her. But what she truly means is this: she can no longer access the version of you that was easy to control. And for a narcissistic personality, losing control feels emotionally unbearable. Many people make the mistake of interpreting this desperation as love or emotional attachment. It is not always love. Often, it is the fear of losing psychological power over someone who once provided validation, attention, or emotional dependence. Your strength exposes the imbalance she tried to keep hidden. And the important lesson here is that growth always disrupts toxic systems. The moment you develop boundaries, clarity, and emotional discipline, unhealthy dynamics begin to collapse under their own weight. Not because you became cruel, but because you finally stopped abandoning yourself to keep others comfortable. And the people who fear your growth the most are often the ones who benefited from your weakness.
One of the most misunderstood forms of power is silence. People often associate strength with confrontation, with winning arguments, with proving a point. But when dealing with a narcissistic woman, constant engagement is often exactly what keeps the toxic cycle alive. The narcissistic personality feeds on emotional reactions, attention, conflict, explanations, anger, even your pain. All of it becomes psychological fuel. And the moment you begin to understand this, you also begin to understand why walking away silently affects her so deeply. Carl Jung believed that psychological maturity begins when a person stops projecting their inner chaos onto the external world. A narcissistic woman does the opposite. She attempts to pull others into emotional turbulence so she can avoid confronting herself. This is why arguments with manipulative people often feel endless. The goal is rarely resolution. The goal is emotional entanglement. But something changes the moment you stop participating, not out of fear, not out of weakness, but from a place of deep self-respect. When you no longer feel the need to defend every accusation, answer every insult, or correct every false narrative, you reclaim your psychological energy. You stop allowing someone else to dictate your emotional state. And this creates something the narcissistic mind struggles to handle: loss of access. Because silence removes the very thing manipulation depends on, your reaction. This is why calm detachment often provokes stronger responses than anger ever did. She may attempt to provoke you intentionally. She may send mixed signals, create jealousy, spread false stories, or suddenly act affectionate again. All of these are attempts to reopen emotional contact, because as long as you react emotionally, she still feels connected to your mind. But emotional freedom begins when you realize you do not need to attend every battle you are invited to. Jung understood that individuation requires separating yourself from forces that distort your inner balance. And sometimes the most powerful statement a person can make is not spoken aloud at all. It is the decision to walk away from chaos without needing revenge, validation, or the final word. Because true power is not controlling another person. True power is no longer being controlled by them. In the end, something inevitable begins to happen when a narcissistic woman realizes she can no longer control you. The mask starts to fall apart. The charm weakens. The carefully constructed image becomes harder to maintain, and the very tactics once hidden beneath subtle manipulation become visible in plain sight. This is the moment many people finally experience a painful but necessary awakening. They realize the relationship was never built on genuine emotional intimacy, but on control, dependency, and psychological influence. Carl Jung often spoke about the persona, the social mask people wear to gain acceptance, admiration, or power. Every narcissistic personality depends heavily on this mask. It allows them to appear loving, misunderstood, confident, or emotionally superior, while hiding deep insecurity and inner emptiness beneath the surface. But masks require cooperation to survive. They depend on your willingness to ignore contradictions, excuse harmful behavior, and suppress your intuition. The moment you stop doing that, the illusion begins to crack. This is why your emotional strength becomes so important. Not because it changes her, but because it changes what you are finally able to see clearly. You begin recognizing patterns instead of isolated incidents. You stop romanticizing temporary affection after emotional abuse. You stop confusing manipulation with love. And perhaps most importantly, you stop blaming yourself for someone else's inability to love in a healthy and honest way. That clarity is transformative, because once the mask falls, her reactions often become more extreme. The kindness may disappear suddenly. The victim narrative becomes stronger. The anger becomes more visible. And ironically, these final tactics reveal the truth more clearly than anything else ever could. Her desperation exposes the very intentions she tried so hard to hide. But this moment is not only about seeing her clearly. It is also about finally seeing yourself clearly. You realize how much strength it took to survive the confusion, the guilt, the emotional exhaustion, and still continue growing. You recognize that your peace was never weakness, your empathy was never foolishness, and your ability to walk away from manipulation was the beginning of psychological freedom. Because the moment someone's mask falls is also the moment your vision returns, and once you see the truth clearly, you can never again be controlled by illusion.